We'll move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? And I give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, your government has delivered 2 budgets which have weakened our economy. Taxes are up, and electricity and gas bills are getting out of control.
Order.
We have higher inflation than the US, France and Germany. Australians are worse off today than when you came to government 13 months ago. When will the Prime Minister accept responsibility for his economy-destroying policies?
I'll give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question.
The member for Deakin will cease interjecting.
The fact is that under this government, under this government,
Leader of the Opposition has asked his question. Order.
Under this government, what we have is turned a $78 billion deficit in the first projected surplus in 15 years of $4.2 billion. We have the strongest jobs growth in the first year of any new government. 465,000 new jobs created, and for the first time we have more than 14 million Australians have a job. We have a record number of women in jobs and more women working full-time. We have pay packets growing at the fastest rate in more than a decade. We have the gender pay gap has fallen to a historic low of 13.3%. And the Leader of the Opposition raises international comparisons, and I'm happy to do so. The GDP growth of Australia is higher than all of the G7 countries, higher than Canada, higher than France, higher than Germany, higher than Italy, higher than Japan, higher than the United Kingdom and higher than the United States. The participation rate is higher than all of those countries as well. And employment growth is higher than every single country in the G7. And we are the only country that is in surplus. All G7 countries are in deficit. And of course, because of this government, more than 1 million Australians will pay less for childcare next month. 11 million Australians will pay less to see a doctor. Because of our budget, another 6 million Australians will pay less for their medicines. 480,000 Australians will pay zero for TAFE, pay nothing for TAFE. 5 million Australian families will get relief on their power bills, and 1 million small businesses will get relief as well. 111,000 households will pay less to make their houses more energy efficient. And of course, 250,000 aged care workers will get a pay rise. And people on the minimum wage will also pay more. This government has put forward a constructive budget. Those opposite still haven't put a costing on the one thing that they announced in their budget reply.
The call to the member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. What approaches have the Albanese Labor government changed to make budget management more responsible, and why is this so important?
The call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and to the member for Boothby. The Liberals and Nationals made a mess of the budget, and we are cleaning it up. Our responsible budget management is rebuilding our nation's finances and leading to smaller deficits and less debt and lower interest costs. We are returning 87% of revenue upgrades. We found $40 billion in savings and reprioritisations compared to $0 in the last budget of those opposite. We are forecasting a budget improvement of more than $143 billion over the 4 years to 2025-26 from the last budget they delivered. The improvements in the budget are a direct and a deliberate result of the actions taken by this Albanese Labor government. And as we've said, a stronger budget isn't just an end in itself, it's a foundation for everything we want to do for our people and for our society. It allows us to provide responsible cost of living relief to people who are doing it tough, and to invest in the capabilities of our people and the capacity of our economy into the future.
Order.
And importantly, our responsible budget takes pressure off inflation, a fact acknowledged by the Reserve Bank Governor. Now, a week before the budget was handed down on the 9th of May, the member for Hume issued a press release that said the test for this budget will be to balance the budget. Well, we are now 8 days before the end of the financial year, and we are on track to deliver the first surplus in 15 years, Mr Speaker.
Order.
Those opposite were forecasting a $78 billion deficit for the same year. And what's clear is that we wouldn't be anywhere
Order.
near a surplus
Members on my left.
without our spending restraint, our savings and our decision to return most of the revisions to revenue to the bottom line. Now, when those opposite came to office, they promised a string of surpluses. They said, and I quote, "We will deliver a surplus in our first year and every year after that." And we all know how that turned out, Mr Speaker. They went 0 for 9
Order.
donuts, Mr Speaker. The great irony of Australian politics is the Liberals talk about surpluses and the Greens talk about social housing, and in the last decade neither has delivered any of either. In fact, Mr Speaker, those opposite delivered more consecutive deficits than any government since the 1920s. They delivered the biggest deficits since Federation, Mr Speaker. It was a decade of debt, a decade of deficit and a decade of disappointment, Mr Speaker, and that's because surpluses aren't made of mugs and they're not made of memes. They're delivered through the responsible economic management and spending restraint that would be unrecognisable to the economic failures who sit over there, Mr Speaker. We take responsibility for cleaning up the mess that they left of the budget.
Order. There is far too much noise in the chamber. Even if it's the last day, everyone needs to take a breath. So I can hear from the member for Riverina.
Indeed. Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Professor Megan Davis, a member of the government's referendum working group, has written of The Voice that, quote, "The Voice will be able to speak to the Reserve Bank." Minister, would The Voice have the power to offer advice to the Reserve Bank on interest rates?
Order. Order. The member for Wannon will cease interjecting. The member for Riverina was heard in silence. So shall the Minister for Indigenous Australians, who has the call.
Thank
Your teammate.
Order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Reserve Bank is independent. Not even the Prime Minister can influence the Reserve Bank.
Order. 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 I give the call to the member for Wills.
Thank you.
The member for Deakin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Environment and Water. How is the Albanese Labor government acting to protect and restore nature while rewarding landholders for their good environmental work? And what has been the response?
Give the call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Against nature.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Wills for his question and for his support for the Nature Repair Bill, which passed through the House of Representatives last night. This is a bill that's designed to make it easier for Australian businesses, individuals, philanthropists to invest in projects like planting trees, restoring stream banks, getting rid of feral species, dealing with weeds on farmers' properties, making our land and our beaches and our seas more resilient. It's great for farmers, for First Nations communities, for other landholders that have already been doing this work on their land, protecting and restoring nature. It's a way of getting more money into nature restoration. Mr Speaker, no government has done more for the environment or for climate change than this government. No government has invested more in the environment than the Albanese Labor government. This project is not designed to replace government effort, but to enhance it, to join with it, to better improve nature. That's why the World Wildlife Fund, for example, have said they support initiatives that recognise and reward real improvements in conservation outcomes. It's why it's supported by the Northern Land Council, by Landcare, by Farmers for Climate, the Australian Land Conservation Alliance, by the National Farmers Federation. So I want to thank Labor MPs and those on the crossbench that worked so constructively to pass this legislation. But I want to say, Mr Speaker, that I am perplexed that once again we have the coalition teaming up with the Greens political party to block action to protect nature. So on the one hand, the National Party have been saying this is their proudest achievement. Their proudest achievement. On the other hand, we've got the Greens who are saying, please invest more in nature. Where's the money? And here they have an opportunity to direct money into the hands of farmers and regional communities and to support more investment in nature. And what do we see instead? We have the National Party voting against money for farmers and the Greens political party voting against investment in the environment. Mr Speaker, it is extraordinary that they have teamed up once again to say no because they are addicted to saying no. Instead, please, in the Senate, reconsider your position. Work constructively with us as the other members of the crossbench did. Let's see farmers, native title holders, private landholders better rewarded for their protection of nature.
Before I call the member for Warringah, I'm pleased to advise the House that in the gallery today is Ms Mary Eason, the former member for Lowe, nurses from Papua New Guinea who are in Australia as part of the International Workforce Development Program, and students from Christian College and the member for Corangamite's electorate. A warm welcome to you all. Give the call to the member for Warringah.
To the Prime Minister. Your government has backflipped and blocked an inquiry into Middle Arm in Darwin despite $1.5 billion of taxpayers' money allocated to this project, extensive self-interested lobbying and seemingly no independent business case or assessment of risks and benefits to the Australian people. FOIs show the key purpose is as a gas export terminal. Why is the public funding key infrastructure for a private gas company to make record profits from exports?
The call to the Minister for Resources and the Minister for Northern Australia.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think the member was trying to impute that there is a subsidy for fossil fuels on the Middle Arm. That is not the case, and we've made that very clear that is not the case, and it will continue to be the case. We will continue to work with the Northern Territory Government on the development of the Sustainable Development Project there in the Northern Territory on Middle Arm. It is very important for the Northern Territory to diversify its economy. It does have challenges to its economy, and this government, the Albanese Labor government, will continue to support and work with the Northern Territory Government. As the Minister for Infrastructure has said before, this government will have an equity stake in that project and will continue to work with right across Northern Australia, particularly in Darwin, where this project is very important for future export industries.
The Minister has concluded her answer. We give the call to the member for Spence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. How will the Albanese Labor government's ambitious housing agenda help tackle housing challenges across Australia, and what is currently blocking it?
Give the call to the Minister for Housing, Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Spence for that important question and for his support for our broad, ambitious housing agenda, Mr Speaker, because it is ambitious, but importantly it's also achievable, Mr Speaker. The $575 million that we unlocked immediately means homes are under construction today because of the decisions that we made. The Housing Accord in our first budget, another 10,000 affordable rental homes matched by the states and territories with another 10,000 affordable rental homes.
Member for Deakin.
Of course, in our last budget, the $2 billion for Housing Australia to support more social and affordable homes, and our changes to build to rent, again to encourage more rental homes to be built in Australia. And then, of course, our announcement last weekend of the $2 billion social housing accelerator.
The Minister will pause a moment. The member for Deakin, the member for Wannon are now warned. If they persist with any interjections, they will leave the chamber. Not having any more of it. Give the call to the Minister in continuation.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The $2 billion Social Housing Accelerator announced last weekend investments in social homes, that is public and community housing with the states and territories. And of course our Housing Australia Future Fund, which will build 30,000 social and affordable rental homes in the first 5 years of the fund, is central to our ambitious housing agenda, but it's clearly not the only thing that we are doing. And Mr Speaker, what we are as a government is we're about delivering, but what we won't do as a government is offer something that is impossible. And that's what we're being asked to do in the Senate, where our Housing Australia Future Fund is being blocked. We've got the Liberals and the Nationals who are blocking it because, of course, they no longer believe in future funds, even though they set some up. And then, of course, we've got the Greens political party who are blocking it for something that actually cannot be delivered, Mr Speaker.
Order.
Everybody in this place knows that in the Constitution it shows very clearly that we do not have the power to implement a rent freeze, very clearly. Secondly, of course, Mr Speaker, the experts and the evidence tells all of us that it will make the situation worse, that it won't work. Indeed, the Australian Housing and Urban Research Institute said, and I quote, "It won't work because it will discourage new investments, so supply will not be brought on." And then, of course, you've got Professor Graham Samuel, the former head of the ACCC, who said they should understand that the fundamental problem is we've got a lack of supply. And he went on to say, the moment you put a rental cap in place, you just simply exacerbate the supply problem. Mr Speaker, on this side of the House, we do want to get on with the job of building more homes. We want to deal with supply as I outlined. We also, of course, want to support the Australians that are renting, and we're doing that through the National Cabinet with renters' rights. We did that in our last budget with our increases to the Commonwealth Rent Assistance, the 15% increase, the largest increase in more than 30 years. While we are delivering, of course, those on the other side want to keep delaying. They want to keep blocking this important legislation. They can keep blocking it for things that are impossible. We're going to keep on delivering for Australians that need it most.
The call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Minister, if The Voice provides advice to the government to change or abolish Australia Day, will the government follow that advice?
The Assistant Treasurer, the Minister for Cybersecurity and Home Affairs, will cease interjecting. The Deputy was heard in silence. The Minister will be heard in silence, and she has the call.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Speaker. I refer to my previous answer on this matter yesterday. And to provide context, Mr Speaker, I'd like to acknowledge the 4 land councils from the Northern Territory that join us today. Mr Samuel Bush-Blonsey from the Northern Land Council, Matthew Palmer from Central Land Council, Gibson Farmer from Tiwi and Thomas Amagula from Mandaliaqua. They have come together at Barunga and issued the Barunga Voice Declaration, which they presented to the Prime Minister this morning. In part it says, we need to be heard and urge our fellow Australians to stand with us and vote yes in the forthcoming referendum for the sake of a better future for all of us. A better future for all of us.
The call to order. Give it order. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government working to improve access to affordable housing, and why has the Housing Australia Future Fund failed to pass?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Gilmore for her question. And of course the government does have a comprehensive plan for housing, and we've been acting. Just on Saturday we announced our $2 billion social housing accelerator. And we want that to add to our $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund, which has failed to pass the Senate. I was heartened to see this morning a media release, Mr Speaker. It came across my desk today, and it said this: Greens set to negotiate with government on housing bill. Said the Greens are ready to negotiate in good faith to get the public, community and affordable housing Australia desperately needs. And I thought, you beauty, Mr Speaker. They've woken up to themselves. But then I saw the date on the bottom. The 4th of October 2022. Since then, it's been clear there's no good faith here, Mr Speaker. Just a political party driven by self-interest, which is prepared to declare in writing, this parliamentary conflict helps create the space for a broader campaign. That's prepared to declare, while Parliament has debated the HAF, the Greens have also launched a national door-knocking campaign targeted at Labor-held federal electorates. That's prepared to declare in writing, allowing the HAF to pass would demobilise the growing section of civil society that is justifiably angry about the degree of poverty and financial stress that exists in such a wealthy country. So faced with being in Parliament and in a position to actually try and address poverty and financial stress, they declare in writing that would demobilise the movement against poverty and financial stress. So therefore they block the Housing Australia Future Fund. Now, Australians rejected the pathology of political conflict that had defined the Morrison government, always looking for an argument, never looking for a solution. But Australians will also reject the phony political conflict being waged by the Greens political party. You can't say you support public housing while you're voting against it. You can't say that you're serious about protecting vulnerable people in our society whilst you're voting against public housing. Vulnerable people should not be the collateral damage in your manufactured political conflict. Yeah. Time to stop blocking so we can start building. Yeah.
Order. The member for Deakin will leave the chamber under 94A. We're not mucking around today. Order. I give the call to the member for Bowman.
My question is for the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Referendum Working Group member Thomas Mayo has stated that we need the power of the Constitution behind us so we can organise like we've never organised before, and that if we keep going, we maintain this momentum until we change the system, until we tear down the institutions. Was the minister aware of Mr Mayo's views when she appointed him to the Referendum Working Group?
Order. The Assistant Treasurer will remain silent for this answer. Give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I addressed this issue yesterday and the day before, and I am responsible for what I say.
Order.
The referendum is about two things. It's about recognition and it's about listening. It's about making a practical difference, and I simply will not engage in the style of politics that we're seeing today.
Call to the order. The call to the member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Health. How will the Voice provide better opportunities to close the gap in health outcomes for First Nations people?
Give a call to the House will come to order because I want to hear from the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Robertson for his question, because later this year Australians will have the chance to vote to change our constitution to recognise the place of First Nations peoples in this country. More than 30 years after the High Court finally swept aside that long-standing fiction that this was vacant land when Europeans arrived more than 200 years ago. Mr Speaker, Australians will get a chance to give shape to that recognition through a voice to the Parliament and to the Executive. And I can't think of a more important area where we should listen to that voice than in health. For too many years, Mr Speaker, the Parliament and health ministers of both political persuasions have been confronted with the appalling health gaps that exist between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. Health challenges that unarguably impact Indigenous Australians differently, to use the language of the Attorney-General, but also some health challenges that are largely unknown to non-Indigenous Australians. challenges like rheumatic heart disease, which was largely eradicated from developed countries more than 50 years ago. It's a disease, Mr Speaker, of grinding poverty. Doctors in our major cities will likely never see a case of rheumatic heart disease, but the rates in remote Aboriginal communities are among the highest in the world, higher even than in sub-Saharan Africa. Mr Speaker, these health gaps are reflected most starkly through 8 fewer years of life for Indigenous Australians, but they're riddled right through the system, and in some cases they're frankly getting much, much worse. While cancer deaths very happily declined overall by 10% last decade across Australia, they actually increased by 10% for Indigenous Australians. Mr Speaker, none of this is news. We've all known about this for years, and we have all worked hard to close the gap. But with the best of intentions and with substantial investment, the current approach simply isn't working. And in the few areas where it is, it's simply not working fast enough. Frankly, Mr Speaker, we do need a new approach. And I'm confident that a voice to the Parliament and, frankly, a voice to the Health Minister will help find better, more effective, practical ways to close the gap and to allow Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders to live longer, healthier, happier lives.
Call to the member for Menzies.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Yesterday, the minister told this House that subsection 3 of the Voice constitutional amendment means Parliament will determine the functions and powers of the Voice. Isn't it the case that subsection 3 explicitly deprives Parliament of that power to make laws where those laws conflict with the Voice's powers under subsection 2, and interpreting the scope of those powers would be a matter for the High Court, not this Parliament?
Order. 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 Member for Page. Members on my left will cease interjecting. Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, I'm not sure if it is possible to have a question that is more directly seeking a legal opinion than the one that was just asked. And the standing orders have very few prohibitions, but that's one of them.
I'll hear from the manager.
Well, Mr Speaker, this is a question that asks the member it goes to matters that the minister. Order. It goes to matters that the minister put to the House yesterday, so it's perfectly standard to ask the minister to explain what she was saying in her answer yesterday.
The part of the question regarding a legal opinion obviously is not in the standing orders. The question regarding the minister's answer yesterday is in order, so she's able to refer to that part of the question, and I'll give her the call. The minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I absolutely stand by my response yesterday.
Give the call to the order. The Attorney-General. Order. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Tangney. Order.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What is the education gap between the Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians? How will the Voice help to close that gap? Thank you.
Give the call to the Minister for Education.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the sensational member for Tangney for his question.
Order.
This year, all Australians have a chance to make history, to put our history in our Constitution and recognise the fact that Australia didn't begin when Captain Cook arrived, that the Australian story, that our story goes back more than 60,000 years. And we have a chance this year to give that history a voice. Why are Indigenous Australians asking us for that voice? To answer that question, imagine this. Mr Speaker, imagine a life where your brother or your sister dies a decade younger than they should. Imagine a life where your children don't go to preschool or where they fall behind at primary school. A life where they will never finish high school. Imagine a life where your children are more likely to go to jail than to university. Just imagine that for a second. That's not a life that you would cop, but that's a life that a lot of Indigenous Australians live. And if you lived that life, you would know that this is about people, not parking tickets. It's not about interest rates. This is about things like this.
Member for New England.
At the moment, 56% of young children start prep or kindy developmentally ready to start school, but only 34% of young Indigenous kids do. And that number's getting worse, not better. The gap is getting bigger, not smaller. At the moment, Indigenous Australians are 3 times more likely to fall behind at school than the other kids in the classroom. At the moment, 82% of students finish high school in Australia, but only 57% of Indigenous kids do. And at the moment, 1 in 2 young Australians in their 20s have a uni degree, but only 7% of Indigenous students do. We all want this to change. Everything that is good and fair and decent in this country wants this to change. But if we want it to change, we have to change not just what we do, but the way we do things. And that's what The Voice is about. It's not me saying that, it's not us saying that, it's what Indigenous Australians are saying. Asking us to listen, asking to be heard, asking for something that will have no impact on most of us, but could just change the lives of a lot of other Australians. As Noel Pearson has said, ultimately The Voice will demand better results out of school education. If that's not a reason to vote yes, then I don't know what is.
Minister, time is up. Order. Give the call to the member for Indi.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, regional Australia is suffering from a disastrous lack of housing supply. In Wangaratta, people are sleeping in tents because there's nowhere for them to go. Last week, the government said it was going to give $2 billion to the states and territories to build thousands of new homes. Did the government impose any conditions or receive any assurances that some of this money must go to regional Australia?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Indi for her question. And certainly when I was having discussions with each of the premiers and chief ministers, as well as at the virtual meeting that we held last Friday afternoon, all of the premiers, including the Premier of Victoria, who of course I announced the program with on Saturday at Moonee Valley, and then I had a meeting with him afterwards. He's very conscious about the need for homes to be built, not just in our capital cities, but in our regions as well. Our regions as well.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting or be warned. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition, I just said, don't interject or you'll be warned, and you immediately interjected. I don't know how clear I can be to her. She is warned and will remain silent for the rest of question time. The Prime Minister in continuation.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The Victorian Premier certainly knows where regional Victoria is because he holds the seats throughout regional Victoria as well. And he happens to be from the bush as well.
The member for Fremantle.
But each of the states and territories want to use this funding, this additional funding, on top of the $1.6 billion that we allocated for the one-year extension of the Commonwealth State Housing Agreement, on top of the $2 billion that's been provided additional for community housing to ensure that we deal with the issue of pressure, particularly on our major capital cities on the East Coast. So that is something that we have had very serious discussion on, and that when we meet again next time round, there will be a focus, just as part of planning, which the states and territories have agreed on, to ensure that zoning is appropriate, to make sure that we can get more houses built, to make sure they can be built in appropriate places. One of the drivers of that is the increased need to have more housing in regional communities. And so I'm happy to work with the member for Indi on an ongoing basis, as I'm sure the Housing Minister is, and our Infrastructure Minister, who has responsible for cities and regional development policy as well as the local government Minister as well, because a lot of this is about working with the 3 levels of government. What we know is that many of these communities as well are suffering from a failure to be able to fill the labour markets that are available because there is enormous growth in these communities. So I thank the member for her question, which is similar to the question raised by the member for Kennedy yesterday, and I look forward to working with her on an ongoing basis to make sure that it is delivered.
The call to the honourable member for Paterson.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence. Following a wasted decade in the defence portfolio, what action is the Albanese Labor government taking to clean up the mess?
The call to the Minister for Defence and the Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the member for her question, and front and centre in my responsibilities over the course of the last year has been cleaning up the mess that has been left by the single worst government on national security in our country's history. We inherited a capability gap with our submarines as the former coalition government were in and out of a deal with Japan, in and out of a deal with France, giving rise to a decade of indecision. We inherited 28 different programs running a combined 97 years over time. And what we've now learned is that in their last 5 years, the former government engaged in $20 billion worth of effective cuts to the defence budget, including taking billions of dollars secretly from the defence budget in a single strategic reserve adjustment alone. Now, the Leader of the Opposition was the last Defence Minister in that government, but to be fair, it was not all his fault, because what preceded him was a revolving door of Defence Ministers. Johnson, Andrews, Senator Payne, Senator Reynolds. It's hard to remember them all. But what is really clear about that revolving door is that the former government regarded the defence portfolio as a trophy, and they saw the Defence Force as an opportunity simply to raise money for the Liberal Party. The Liberals believed that they had a brand advantage.
The Deputy Prime Minister will just pause so I can hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, as well as being a wildly inaccurate melange of factual misstatements—
What's the point of order?
The point of order is on relevance to the question. This minister has spent well over a minute on matters carried out under the previous government. Your ruling has been that the appropriate thing for the minister to do is to speak about what he's doing, and I'd suggest to you he should be brought back to that requirement.
The member for Gippsland is warned. The Leader of the House.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. To the point of order, the objection that the Manager of Opposition Business making is actually an objection to the question. Once the question was in order and they didn't object to it, the Deputy Prime Minister is certainly being relevant to every part of it.
Clarity. The Leader of the Opposition.
Whilst you're considering the matter, Mr Speaker, there was an improper imputation that the Minister suggested, and he should withdraw that, Mr Speaker. He should withdraw that unparliamentary remark that was quite offensive, quite separate to the other valid points made by the Manager of Opposition Business.
The Leader of the House.
To what was just raised, because I know there's an increasing trend to try to seek anything withdrawn if it upsets someone, even in a political sense. What the Deputy Prime Minister did was explain a point of fact about when donations were sought, and points of fact should not have to be sought to be withdrawn.
Just going to remind the Deputy Prime Minister to be careful with his language, so it's within standing orders. On the point of order, the question was about, following a wasted decade in defence, what action the government has taken to clear up the mess. Whilst the minister is allowed some compare and contrast, he needs to remain his answer within standing orders. I'll listen to him carefully to make sure that he is complying with that, and he has the call for the remaining time of his answer. I'll hear from the member for Wannon.
Mr. Speaker, there was an imputation, and I would ask you to look at it, because it would help the House if the minister withdrew. But if he doesn't, I would ask you to look at that and come back and advise us why he hasn't.
Order. The member is entitled to raise a point of order. Members on my right, I shall review what the minister said and write back to the member for Wannon. I give the call to the Deputy Prime Minister.
Astonishingly and infamously, they actually tried to do it. The Liberal Party think they have a brand advantage on national security, but that has made them lazy. Theirs is not a party of defence strategists, it's a party of defence dilettantes. And if they ever did have a strategic advantage on national security, one achievement in the last decade is that those opposite totally and completely obliterated that. Mr. Speaker, the country has moved on. This government has now removed the capability gap when it comes to our submarines. We have retasked our Defence Force for the first time in 35 years. We have got the defence budget back in order, focusing the defence spend on where defence needs it the most. Serious people running a serious government, making serious decisions, because, Mr. Speaker, the proper reading of Australian history is that when times have been difficult for our national security, Australians have always looked to Labor. The First World War, the Second World War, the Cold War, Fisher, Curtin, Hawke, and as our country faces the most complex strategic circumstances since the Second World War, another Labor government, the Albanese government, is committed to keeping Australians safe.
Order. Members on my left and right. The member for Riverina can now be warned alongside the member for Gippsland, two of you. I want to hear from the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, it's been more than 7 months since flooding hit central West New South Wales. In towns like Eugowra, more than 100 people are still living in temporary housing with no government support to rebuild their homes. Prime Minister, when will communities in central West New South Wales get this support?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question, and I visited Eugowra, of course, with the then New South Wales Premier, Dominic Perrottet, and the member for Calare, as well as the local mayor. Just as I visited communities such as Lismore and others that have been affected by flooding, just as, tragically, I visited the area of the Riverland with the member for Barker in attendance as well, and tragically as well attended floods in northern Tasmania and floods in Broome and around the Kimberley. This has had an enormous impact. Of course, I am certainly not just willing, but I want to work with the member, as I've worked with other members on issues in Lismore. We work to actually purchase some properties as well and make sure, but I know that the Mayor of Lismore, who I met last week when I was at the Australian Council of Local Government, indicated there were still really ongoing problems there. So where there are problems, that is not good enough. Simple as that. We need to do better. Governments of all persuasions need to work together. These aren't partisan issues. I don't take a partisan approach to this, as the Leader of the National Party will know. That's why I have always informed. I visited seats with the member for Page, with the member for Barker, with the member for Calare, wherever these occur, I am willing to do whatever it is that the Commonwealth will do. Of course, by and large, it is states that provide housing. Of course, there is no Commonwealth Public Works Department that builds housing and provides support. Some of the issues which are there as well that we need to work with are on issues of insurance for people, and we know that that's been a challenge. Too many people who've lost everything find themselves in disagreement with insurance companies, and we're working with the Insurance Council on that as well. I must say that I think there's been significant progress there. I worked very closely with the Perrottet government at the time, and we worked in a completely bipartisan way, different levels of government, and I'm sure that the incoming government, the Minns government, I'll certainly raise the issues that he has raised with me, with the Premier of New South Wales, and I'm happy to work with him over the break, to work with the Leader of the Nationals, and the local member for Calare has been very diligent in standing up for his community that has suffered so much as well.
The call to the member for McEwen.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is the Minister for Government Services. I refer to the Minister's previous answers concerning prior lack of probity in procurements and contracts in government services. What have we learned about these previous practices in the portfolio which have been rejected by this government?
Give the call to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance and Government Services.
Thank you. On the 24th of November last year, I first updated the House on the disturbing reports in the Sydney Morning Herald and Age, alleging that Mr Stuart Robert used his status as a federal MP to help Canberra lobbying firm Synergy 360 sign up corporate clients with the promise of helping them navigate government, bureaucracy, parliament, meet key decision-makers, including senior coalition ministers. As further details have emerged, I've updated the parliament subsequently. The initial report detailed how Mr Robert personally intervened in contracts worth $274 million awarded to Indian software giant Infosys. Mr Robert met with Infosys, a Synergy 360 client, in December 2019 at the Gold Coast home of his political fundraiser, Mr John McGarrison. Leaked emails show that he had given insights on progress of Infosys and future opportunities. Flowing from these disturbing revelations, Services Australia and the NDIA investigated potentially tainted contracts linked to Synergy 360. The review, led by eminent former public servant Dr Ian Watt, found of the 95 procurements reviewed, 19, or 1 in 5, had real deficiencies. Since then, the Joint Committee of Public Accounts and Audit, chaired by the member for Bruce, has heard more disturbing allegations against Synergy 360 and Mr Robert. The JCPAA heard evidence from Mr McGarrison explaining how he instructed his accountant to direct Synergy 360 profits derived from Commonwealth contracts to a trust in which Mr Robert was a beneficiary. Section 44(5) of the Constitution covers disqualification of parliamentarians. It states that anyone who has direct or indirect pecuniary interest in any agreement with the public service of the Commonwealth shall be incapable of being chosen or sitting as a member of the Senate or the House of Representatives. To be clear, at this point we do not know if that threshold has been breached. But what we do know, and I'm sure I speak for most members of the House, is this conduct is not business as usual for most members serving in this place. Furthermore, despite these revelations, Mr Robert remained on the front bench until his sudden resignation immediately prior to the formation of the National Anti-Corruption Commission next month, in turn causing the Fadden by-election, costing millions of dollars and inconveniencing 109,000 Gold Coast electors. Still, fundamental questions remain. 1. Was Mr McGarrison installed in Synergy 360 to secure Mr Roberts' influence in government procurement? 2. Was Mr McGarrison installed in 360 to channel funds through related entities to Mr Robert? And crucially, 3. Was Mr Robert a shadow director of Synergy 360?
Give the call to the Leader of the Australian Greens.
Questions to the Prime Minister. This morning on Radio National, when asked about limiting rent increases, the Treasurer said, "We're prepared to show leadership at National Cabinet on renter rights and other aspects." We know you oppose a rent freeze, but even limits on rent rises would make a massive difference to millions of renters in crisis. With the ACT Greens Labor government limiting rent rises and the Victorian government now looking at rent caps after a deal with the Greens, will you show leadership at National Cabinet to help make unlimited rent rises illegal?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Melbourne for his question, and I note that the member for Melbourne and the Greens political party say that this is the stumbling block for them voting for the Housing Australia Future Fund, which would deliver 30,000 additional public and affordable housing units, including 4,000 that are reserved for women and children escaping domestic violence, including funding that would deliver assistance for veterans at risk of homelessness and Indigenous housing. And they say that that's the case. But the truth is that every single state and territory leader has said that they do not support a rent freeze, every single one. And in the ACT, the only jurisdiction in which there is the measure that the member referred to, it is for inflation plus 10%, and that is over just a 1 year over a 1 year period. The fact is that we are organising with the states and territories work on renters' rights, and will continue to do so constructively. But I say to the member for Melbourne, there is legislation before this parliament now.
The member for Griffith will cease
before
interjecting.
the Senate that can be passed. That can be passed with the Greens' support. Can be passed today, and then can return to this House. Legislation that would guarantee at least $500 million a year, additional to everything else that we are doing, would go into social housing. And that would, because the key is supply to putting downward pressure on prices. But I say to the member for Melbourne, this. If the member for Melbourne has been a part of deferring this legislation not once but twice until October, and therefore ensuring that the legislation effectively—
Prime Minister will pause. The Leader of the Australian Greens on a point of order.
Yes, thank you, Speaker. Just on relevance, the 2 and a bit minutes in, and the Prime Minister has not addressed the central question about whether at National Cabinet he will support and advance limits on rent increases. That has not been addressed.
The Prime Minister, under the standing orders, needs to be directly relevant, which he is being, so he is in order. The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I tell you what would have a devastating impact on renters. That would be in June to say, because the Greens political party have blocked this legislation from being even debated until October, if you said to every property owner out there, you've got till October till the rent freeze comes on, what do you think would happen? Do you think they'd put up their rents, or do you think they'd decrease it? That is why your propositions are so ill thought out and opportunistic. Get on with the program, vote for social housing, do it today. In the Senate—
Prime Minister's time has concluded. Order. The member for Herbert will cease interjecting. So we can hear from the member for Fraser.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. Why is the Albanese Labor government so focused on delivering cost-of-living relief to Australian families by making early childhood education more affordable?
Give the call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education and the Minister for Youth.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the member for Fraser for his question, because I know, like me, he's incredibly excited about the fact that 6,600 families in Fraser will benefit from our boost to the childcare subsidy. And, Mr Speaker, the member has asked me why we are so focused on delivering this. Well, quite simply, Mr Speaker, because it's the right thing to do. Because it's the right thing to do. Because this government knows that the first 5 years of a child's life set the foundation for their future. Because this government cares about families and easing the cost of living pressures that they're facing. Because this government knows that the cost of early learning and care has put it out of reach for so many families for far too long. Because this government wants to lift productivity and increase workforce participation. And, Mr Speaker, because investing in early learning is an investment in our economy and an investment in our future. And that's why every day since the Prime Minister used his budget reply speech to make our government's commitment to more affordable early learning, we have been working to deliver on that commitment to the Australian people. Our changes will boost the childcare subsidy for over 1.2 million families right across Australia, and that includes 265,000 families in rural and regional Australia. That's real cost of living relief. That's real money back in the pockets of Australian families. But, Mr Speaker, we know that there is more work to do because we're also looking to the future, taking steps to consider how we build a world-class, affordable early learning system that works for every Australian child. That means children in Cowan, children in Fraser, children in Swan, children in Gellibrand, in every Australian electorate right across the country. One that is flexible and responsive to children and their families' needs. Now, parents like Lauren, who's a teacher from Victoria, told me how important early learning is. And this is what Lauren had to say. She said that access to affordable and quality early learning is essential for me if I am to achieve the career I desire. She continues, I am so thankful that we have a quality local centre that allows me to achieve the balance between what I want professionally and personally. Mr Speaker, our reforms are going to assist people like Lauren and families across the country, and we will continue to make early learning a priority for this government.
The call to the honourable member for Hughes.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Can the minister confirm that The Voice would have the power to advise the government on taxation policy?
Order. The member for New England will cease interjecting. Give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I'm not sure how many times I can say this. The provision makes it very clear that The Voice will advise on matters that affect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and matters that affect Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders differently. That's things like life expectancy. That's things like baby birth rates. That's things like self-harm. These are the things that we are referring to. I cannot be any clearer than that. But can I do so in terms of context, Mr Speaker, just say that the referendum is about two things. It's about recognition and listening. It's about making a practical difference. We have seen the No campaign post things on social media that are clearly false, including an image of Bob Hawke saying that he did not support recognition. And his widow sent me this. There are many joys but also many tears in politics. This is Bob speaking. Bob once said to me, Yunupingu is a soul in torment. He grieves for his people and Bob grieved too. His greatest disappointment as Prime Minister was that he could not deliver his promise to Yunupingu with the Indigenous people of Australia for recognition.
The Minister will pause the Member for Hughes on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, my point of order goes to relevance. The question was very tight. We're now halfway through, and it was a question particularly on whether or not the Voice is going to be able to advise the government on matters of taxation policy.
The Minister is being directly relevant. Order. I'm going to listen to the remainder of her answer. It should be heard in silence.
Mr Speaker, I have been extraordinarily relevant. I've answered the question.
Order.
And as Bob would have said,
Order. Members on my
we
left.
should grab this with both hands, and I suggest you do.
Order. Give the call to the member for Pearce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. As the end of the budgetary parliamentary sittings approaches, what actions has the Albanese Labour government taken to build stronger foundations for a better future? Thank you.
Good question. Order. Order. Members on my left. The member for O'Connor and the member for Herbert, for good measure. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Pearce for her question, and I thank her as one of the 4 new members from Western Australia, which is part of the reason why we were able to form government and have a vote for a better future. And we've worked every day since May last year to deliver for them. 6 weeks ago, our Treasurer handed down our second budget within the first year of us being in a position to form government.
Order.
Mr Speaker,
member for Casey.
That budget builds a stronger foundation for the better future that we committed to. It was about taking pressure off families while not putting pressure on inflation. It was about helping Australians with real relief right now when they need it, whilst building for the long term. The budget built on the achievements of our first year in office, Mr Speaker, turning a $78 billion deficit into a $4.2 billion surplus, boosting bulk billing with a tripling of the bulk billing incentive, helping 11 million Australians to see a doctor for free, the halving of medicine costs for more than 6 million Australians, the funding of an extra 8 Medicare urgent care clinics, investing in a 15% pay rise for aged care workers, provision of $3 billion between us and the states and territories on energy bill relief, increasing JobSeeker, increasing rent assistance, increasing the single-parent payment. Mr Speaker, during all of that, those opposite have said no to absolutely everything. They're defined by what they're against, defined by their negativity. And we see it in the way that they approach question time, where last week they spent it going up a dry gully, and this week they've done the same thing. In less than 10 days, on the 1st of July, another of our commitment will become a reality. Cheaper childcare. Medicare urgent care clinics will start opening. The National Anti-Corruption Commission will start. Our reformed safeguard mechanism will come into force. The energy incentive for small business will take effect.
And the member for Page.
And the extra $2 billion for social housing will start flowing as well. Mr Speaker, we'll keep on with the job while those opposite just keep saying no to everything. And on that note, Mr Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Order.